Jeremy here. This week's episode, we dive into some heavy material. Not heavy material, but controversial subject matter. We spend the next hour talking about pedophilia. In particular, pedophilia is studied as a mental illness, studied by Dr. James Cantor, who is a sexual psychologist. Our conversation with Dr. Cantor, it was a pretty eye-opening one for myself and for Brian and Taylor as well. Before we dive into this conversation, before I let the episode start, I just want to ask you to listen to this episode with an open mind and an open heart. Oftentimes when the word pedophile or pedophilia comes up in conversation, we tend to just shut down, at least for me, right? Every time I would hear that word or I would hear, some sort of story that had something to do with that topic, I would become enraged. There would be this anger that came over me. We condemn pedophilia so strongly as a society that whenever it comes up in conversation, we just shut off. And Dr. James Cantor has a lot to say about what it means to be a pedophile, things that I never really would have considered. So that's all I ask, is for the next hour, just sit down and in the words of Taylor from his really great blog post on this week's episode over at our website, sickboypodcast.com, take a deep breath. Breathe in compassion, breathe out understanding, feel those emotions fully and completely, and then press play, and then listen. As always, we love each and every one of you. Thank you all so much for your support up to this point, and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to Sickboy, a podcast where we talk about what it's like to be sick. This week's guest is Dr. James Cantor. He's a sexual psychologist specializing in pedophilia. So let's talk about it. Yeah, let's just leave it at that. We'll just roll from here.
Yeah.
This has come up. We've done a couple episodes where I kind of get like jammed up in how I want to approach the conversation. Like I don't want to say anything that is wrong, or I don't want to say anything that might like offend and or whatever. Like for example, we did an episode on transgender issues. And I was like, I don't want to say something to offend you.
Yeah.
And she was like, you get a free fucking pass. You can say whatever you want to me.
Yeah, I
think
was
great. But there is this kind of sense of what we are going to dive into today, where I'm like, oh man, it's a hard thing to talk about, right?
Yeah, it is. And when you think about it, how far we have come from not very long ago where we just could not talk it at all, and now we are so sensitive to some people's issues, that's starting to make it hard to talk about. Mm-hmm. It used to be we couldn't talk about it at all just in case it's true. Mm-hmm. Now it's the talking itself. We're aware of what this means to people and how we have to say it in a very sensitive way, which is still a very new way to how we deal with these problems. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to take it as a sign of success. Although there are certainly, when it comes to sex research, many examples where political extremism is shutting down conversation instead of encouraging it.
Just back to what you were saying, Jer, I kind of think of conversations like this where I haven't, or where I just don't know too much about a certain topic. I think of these conversations as a way to really explore that and better understand it, so I can form my own opinions from a more educated standpoint. Mm-hmm. So I'm really interested in having this conversation because I really don't know too much about it.
So why don't we, for the people who are listening and they're like, well, what the fuck are they talking about? What the fuck are they going to talk about?
What is that topic going to be that's so sensitive?
Why don't you introduce yourself? Let us know who you are and your line of work. And
Sure. My name is Dr. James Cantor. I'm a psychologist and a sexual behavior scientist. And most of what I study is the biological basis of atypical sexualities, mostly pedophilia, the sexual interest in children.
That's the big one.
It's a fascinating field. Sometimes I think, why exactly isn't everyone a sex researcher? As my grandmother would have said, if you're going to think about sex all day anyway, you may as well get a job at it.
I love that. Of course, that's amazing.
So the difference? I know a lot of people kind of say pedophilia or pedophilia. Is it tomato, or is there?
Yep, I've heard both. I've heard both. Although if I were going to say something about definitions, and the definitions that people really need to know, it'd be to separate very, very strongly pedophilia itself, which is the actual sexual interest in children. In every meaningful way, it's a sexual orientation. All the science suggests that they're essentially born with it and they can't change it. They're just kind of saddled with it and have to do the best that they can do. Mm-hmm. So it's important to separate the pedophilia itself, the sexual attraction, from the behavior, the child molestation. That's the part that's criminal, and that's the part that we need to really prevent and punish in society.
Right. Now, would you call someone who has a interest in having sex with children, is turned on by the thought of children in a sexual way, would they be considered a pedophile, or is a pedophile someone who acts out on that interest?
The pedophile is the person with the interest, regardless of whether they ever do anything with it or not.
Okay.
The child molester is the person who does it, regardless of what motivated them.
Okay.
If they are sexually interested in children, then they are both a pedophile and a child molester. But there's also a child molestation pattern called surrogacy, really. Unfortunately, there isn't a better term. A lot of those are very common in incest situations, where almost always it's a man abusing usually a daughter or stepdaughter, but really as a replacement for an adult partner. He actually prefers adults. As I say, that those are most of the incest cases, and about 2/3 of all cases.
All right, I think that's a really, really, right off the bat, like a huge chunk of truth and education for anybody who's listening, and me, I'm sure probably the three of us as well, making that separation, because I mean the connotation to me that in my whole life up until just now has been, oh, pedophile, someone who's like molested a child.
Exactly. To most people, they're synonyms.
Right. Exactly. Totally. And just to make that distinction right off the bat, that's a huge okay, let's just drive a stake in between those two and separate them right off the bat.
And now everything from there is just take that and now bring it to its logical conclusion. Imagine, all right, a person without the behavior but has the interest through no fault of their own. They're just born with this thing.
Right.
They can't do anything with it. They can't tell anyone. They can't, giggle and sex play with their friends in quite the same way. They can't, in many circumstances, they can't even tell their therapists.
Mm-hmm. And the sexual orientation, like that, when you think about all the sexual orientations that there are, that you would run through commonly in your day-to-day life, or if someone asked you what the plethora of those are, I wouldn't have until now included that as an orientation, or thought of it that way.
There's, even with us having described this much, or gone into this much depth surrounding the topic, I know for sure that this is one of those things that I feel like people are going to have a very hard time. A lot of people are going to have a very hard time processing this idea, like separating the pedophile from the child molester.
Sure.
Right? Like they're both evil. Right? And that's not what I'm saying is the case. I'm saying that there's people who are going to look at this and just go, yeah, well, no, like it doesn't matter. If you're thinking that, you are inherently a bad person. But that's not the case.
In a just society, it shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people who do, whether they even realize it themselves or not, believe in thought crime. that having the thought somehow makes them less trustworthy, that all they need is the urge itself, and in just the right circumstance they would actually express it.
Right.
That's a natural way we often think about it.
It's like Minority Report, where they can read the mind of the criminal before they actually act on the crime, and then they put them in prison according to their thought rather than the actual crime committed.
What were you gonna say? You were about to.
The example with a regular, everyday straight guy, he still, of course, will be attracted to other women, but that doesn't mean he's at any kind of a meaningful risk to become a rapist just because he's attracted to women.
Right.
So if somebody is attracted to children, that does not automatically put them on the way to committing any other kind of sexual abuse.
Is it okay to say that, is it okay for me to empathize with a pedophile and say, I feel so bad that you are born with this sexual orientation and that you cannot go out and act on that, and that you feel so isolated in your sexuality, but still not think that acting on that is okay?
Yes, I think that that's both a very important, profound, and still very subtle point. I can be empathetic for a person's interests. I can also be empathetic for the idea that the only thing we can ask this person to do is live a celibate life. That's not that's some tall order.
That is a big order.
Exactly.
You know?
But that's what other choice do we have? So it's very easy to be empathetic for that. And then if there's a guy who slips, if he starts downloading child porn, actually does touch a kid, it's also very easy to be empathetic then for the victim. But, you know, so it's not, empathy for one does not mean that I have to withhold it from the other. I can recognize that this is an impossible situation, and we as a society need to be able to find and prevent these kinds of situations rather than just coming in after it's too late.
It is such an insane, mind fuck to think about it, because, you know, on one hand, like I think of my, I don't know, man, it's one of these things that makes me simultaneously, I'm having this feeling of like hardcore empathy for someone, but that at the same time, like this other part of my brain just starts to think of the potential dangers in
exactly, and just naturally want to protect the kids who could be at risk.
But again, it comes back to dividing pedophile from child molester.
Exactly,
right?
Totally.
Because a pedophile hasn't necessarily done anything.
So tell us about. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I feel like you were probably going to go exactly where I was going to go.
Tell us about what is entailed in your work. What do you work on?
Well, the things I've done, the details of what I've done have changed over years. When I first got involved with this particular kind of project, it was already a lab that was well set up and already famous for doing research on pedophilia and different kinds of sexual abusers. When I got there, by sheer coincidence, I had a background in neuropsychology. So I was able, and they're always looking for new ways to evaluate and assess and figure out, new features and characteristics in order to understand what's going on. And these are, this is really before MRI got big, but we could tell it was on its way. It was still only being used for, very obvious brain issues. It wasn't yet used for these more subtle issues. But once I got there, because the hospital was seeing very large numbers of these people, we were able to get large samples of people who had committed offenses against children, some of whom were genuine pedophiles, some of whom were not. And we were able to ask them to volunteer to take part in different kinds of studies. Memory testing, IQ testing, things that we didn't expect turned out to be exquisitely important. Handedness, just whether they're left-handed or right-handed. Now, the reason that that's important, even though at this time we were only suspecting something was going on in the brain, there's only one thing that influences a person's handedness, and that's the basic organization of the brain. In utero, one hemisphere develops before the other. And so in most people, it's the left hemisphere that develops first. It develops faster, so it becomes the dominant hemisphere. And the way the brain works is crossed. So a dominant left hemisphere almost always means a right-handed person. But if something happens during that time of advantage that hemisphere gets, if it grows more slowly because of whatever, maternal stress, poor nutrition, something like that, the other hemisphere tries to catch up, and it starts to take over the functions that were going to be for the other hemisphere, and that person then becomes left-handed, or sometimes ambidextrous or ambiguously handed. So in regular everyday folk, it's about 8%-ish, 10%-ish of men are non-right-handed. But it was over 30% of the pedophiles.
Interesting.
Huge.
Yeah.
The only other groups that had that large of a excess of left-handedness are people with obvious something is different in their brains, people with schizophrenia and people with autism. So all of a sudden now, because we know brain develops before birth, the only way this could be different would be whatever chain of events it is that eventually leads to pedophilia, the first links of that chain have to be before birth. There was just no other way to explain the association.
This might be a stupid question, but does that mean that there's some sort of correlation between pedophilia and schizophrenia and autism in some way? Like,
not in any direct way.
Sure, okay.
There's certainly no pattern that would suggest if somebody is autistic or on the autistic spectrum and or schizophrenic, there's no reason to think that those people are meaningfully more likely to be pedophilic.
Okay.
But if one is studying entire populations, then one might find a statistical association generally showing that if one thing went wrong during development, other things may have gone wrong during development. So you'll get some associations, but not the kind of association where you can say anything about any individual person. The other thing that's difficult specifically with people with schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder is they don't respond to the reality that we see. They can, feel sexual or think a kid is coming on to them sexually because they're hallucinating. They're just not perceiving reality.
Right.
Which is unlike a pedophile for whom this is the genuine look of the kid. That really is what turns them on.
Is that what you mean when you a few 2 or 3 minutes ago you mentioned some of which were authentic? I think you used authentic pedophiles or
I'll say genuine.
Genuine. Is that the distinction? In terms of the study, the people that you were studying?
The main distinction is the genuine pedophiles are the ones who experience the actual sexual preference for children. Mm-hmm. The ones who engage the behavior but still prefer adults, again, it could be in that sexual surrogate kind of situation, which is common in incest offenses. But if it's somebody with schizophrenia, it has nothing really to do with what the person actually looks like. They are just...
How do you test that? Or is there like a measurable way to test because you answered ABC, you're a genuine pedophile?
For schizophrenia, it really would be a fuller part of a whole assessment. This would just be one symptom of many, many different things that are that are different about the person. So really, it would be a good, solid assessment, which would include sexual behavior.
Okay.
But there's no reason to think that it would be specific to sexual behavior. Usually, it's a much broader, distorted way of seeing the world.
Oh, I meant like specifically to pedophilia, though. Like, is there a way to test?
Oh, to test pedophilic child molesters versus non-pedophilic child molesters.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a fascinating series of studies, and the test itself still exists today. It's called a phallometric exam.
A phallometric?
It's also called penile plethysmography.
Yeah, I was like, dick metrics.
That is exactly what it is. It's the most obvious test in the world. It was invented by a guy named Kurt Freund. He was a sex researcher mostly in the mid-20th century. He was Jewish and forced by the communist government in Czechoslovakia at the time to come up with a test that would tell who's gay from who's straight.
Whoa.
The reason for that...
sucks.
It works backwards from what you think it was.
Oh, really? Okay.
He was conscripted essentially for the military to develop such a test because in those days, that gay men were not allowed in the army. So men were faking being gay or saying that they were gay to get out of the army.
You know what's...
So rather than kick them out of the army, which is what we're accustomed to in North America, it's people were using it to get out. And so they had Freund come up with a test that would tell which ones were really gay, in which case they were out, versus the ones who were just faking it and they're back in the army.
The craziest thing is that in ancient Greece, they specifically had to have homosexuals in the army because they believed that when you fought in pairs, you were more attached to your partner that you were fighting alongside of if you were having a sexual relationship with them as well.
It was also much more common that we don't have the social constructs of that time are
I feel
completely
I feel like
different.
Of course,
it's kind of different.
than now.
It's totally different. I'm not saying they're correlated.
I'm picturing this test, the phallometric test, and I'm picturing like the scene from Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, a lot of people
when
do.
he's
A lot of
like
people
sitting
do.
in that chair and their eyes are like forced open. Is that kind of what it is? Like you're forced
no,
to
it's as I say, it's
It's
probably
not-
the most
it's not as
obvious test
aggressive.
in the world. The man wears what's essentially a blood pressure cuff on his penis. It's a ring, and elastic. An elastic goes around the metal part of the ring, and then a glass cylinder over that. So as he gets more or less of an erection, the computer records how much air is getting moved in and out of that cylinder.
They just flash up pictures of dicks and vaginas.
There are. That's the basic idea.
Just
There are
everything,
3
yeah.
pictures. Whole body, rear view, front view of adults, children, and pubescent children, 11 to 14ish
but
on
they
average.
don't. But like, what kinds of photos? We're not like they're not. Are they showing like sexual photos of children?
No, they're nudes. They're the kind of nudes you would see in a medical textbook. So there's
okay.
really
So-
no emotion
okay.
on their
There's
faces. There's
not-
nothing
okay.
erotic to them.
Got it.
They're listening on headphones to stories describing sexual interactions, but the photos are just photos. They're not even particular. They were not selected to be attractive models. They were selected very specifically to be average, typical-looking models.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
I have a question that I've been wanting to ask, and now it popped up in that last thing you said. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, and he was curious about the distinction, or if there is a distinction between a person who is, I mean, we've come up with the social construct that an adult is 18 plus, correct?
Yeah, I think I know where you're going.
Right?
here.
And to him, there seemed to be, and I agree, that there's a very big difference between like a pubescent a child, pre-18, and a prepubescent child. And if there is a spectrum on which pedophiles think, or whether they have a preference for prepubescent or postpubescent, and where does that?
Where's the line? Where do you draw the line?
for-
Excellent question. Yes, there is. Unlike sexual orientation, which is not completely but pretty dichotomous, but age is not. Unlike, male or female with not very much in between, specific trans issues excluded. But with age, it's a gradation from young to old. And people do appear to have favorite ages, or at least a most preferred age.
Right.
Male human, average favorite is early 20s, roughly 21 to 25. Culture after culture, throughout history, wherever we can tell, it seems to be early 20s. Which matches up at peak reproductive time. That's when women are most fertile.
Yeah.
And have usually the highest reproductive value, evolutionary theorists call it. Now, there are people who prefer younger, there are people who prefer older, and people also have a second best, slightly older or slightly younger than right around their own age. Teenage boys will usually have a preference for girls who are a little bit older than they are because they're closer to 20 to 25. Even a 14-year-old boy will put up posters of models who are in their early 20s, not girls who are in their teens in general. Now, we do, when doing sex research, we do often want to chop these up into as fine a distinction as we can, When we do that, we will usually put there's been a traditional line at puberty. But of course, exactly where puberty is a bit, forgive the term, fuzzy.
Right.
Yeah.
So usually somebody who is, I'm not the one who started that, it was not a sex researcher who did, Ray Blanchard. In many circumstances, we would restrict who we're talking about to pre-pubertal kids, and that's a pedophile. The person who's attracted to early pubescent age kids, downy, wispy pubic hair, but not adult, coarse pubic hair. A girl would have breast buds, but she wouldn't have adult-sized breasts. So really a pubescent age kid. On average, in Western society, as I say, that's somewhere between 11 and 14. A person who prefers that age we would call a hebophile, H-E-B-E.
Hebophile.
Right, where heba is Greek for youth instead of pedo, which is child.
Yeah, sure.
So some people have reflexively used that under the belief that that's where nature's joint is. Turns out that's not really where nature's joint is. Nature's joint seems to be that hebephilia goes with pedophilia, and older than that is just a range of normal. People are into 15, 16 years old, we call ephebophiles, and then regular everyday folk who are into adults 17 plus-ish, we call teleophiles. And then way at the other end we get, having recently had my 50th birthday, I'm coming to think of them more and more, the gerontophiles.
Gerontophiles. That's quite the name.
So having all of these.
Hold on. So we would be. My wife is she's 4 years older than me, and we're not monogamous, and I tend to see people who are in their early 20s. That's considered a what?
Perfectly typical.
There's
well within the average.
There's not a file to that.
The average typical everybody philia is teleophilia.
Teleophilia.
Yep.
Okay. And Brian, you are generally what was it?
Gerontophilia.
Gerontophile.
You love the gerontophilia.
Though my girlfriend is 25, so...
No, that's still very, very teleophile.
Oh, never mind. I guess I screwed that up. At what age does that... Really is it plus 50? Is that gerontophile plus 50?
Usually for a real gerontophile, that would be still pretty young.
Okay.
Depending on the look of the person. There's a wide variety. There are well-kept 50-year-olds, thank you very much, and there are 50-year-olds who are starting to droop a bit more.
Right.
But really, you can't decide on a person's single relationship or specific significant other. That doesn't really necessarily describe their preference in general.
Right, because there's much more going on other than just the sexual attraction. Do you mean?
There's that, and for example, if somebody fell in love in the old days, age of consent, of course, was very young. Even though somebody had a relationship very young doesn't mean that they prefer people at that age. Sometimes it was just that's what they did at that age.
Right.
Age of consent issues were also associated with inheritance issues.
Arranged marriages and things like that in certain cultures.
Exactly, and guaranteed that the girl especially was a virgin on marriage. So in the early days, the wedding night was not automatically the day sex began, which is, the 20th century or Victorian standard.
Yeah. So having talked about all these tiers of age groups and their associated terminology, we have one law that comes down on somebody who has committed a sexual crime against someone below the age of 18 when they are above the age of 18, correct?
I think so.
Around here in Ontario, the age of consent is 16.
Yeah, I thought it was 16.
Okay.
Too.
Is there or should there be distinctions made based on those age groups?
Do you mean should there be a difference in punishment between if it's a 30-year-old is a hebdophile, or is that what
Hebophile
versus a 30-year-old who is a pedophile? Should there be a different a more harsh penalty for the pedophile than the
Hebophile.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Is that what you asked?
And I don't know if that's in your wheelhouse at all.
Yeah.
It is, but I want to underline that you've already said and tripped over the most important part. Not all these cases are the same. Which is exactly how most of the laws are. Just take every book you can think of and throw it at them. I don't care what the crime is, the more heinous thing I can think of, the holier I must be, and just throw every case as if every case is the worst case you can think of.
Yeah.
As opposed to, pick your age ranges. A 12-year-old and a 16-year-old. Well, that was pretty typical sex play. I'm not sure it's a crime at all.
Right.
Then there are younger kids and older kids where, just bodily exploration is perfectly normal. And now if one is more developed than the other, I don't mean physically, mentally. We've the younger one is actually more with it than the older one was. That happens sometimes. Is that the same as... Is that the same as a situation where one is taking advantage of another? Or is it just one is bullying the other and used a sexual way to bully the other? Is this really what we meant by a sex crime? Or when it's a sibling-on-sibling situation is completely different from when it's two kids in a playground, which is completely different from when it's a stepfather and a stepchild. So in each of these cases, there are different motivations, there are different levels of harm that they pose, and different interventions that we need to put the family unit or community back together. Now, I don't have a perfect answer for any one of these, but you hit on exactly correctly that we need to look at what each case needs, where it came from, and how do we set it right. It's not just punish, 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 throw the person in jail forever, and throw the person in jail forever. Not only is it expensive, it probably gets in the way of preventing these cases. If an example that is very common but nobody thinks of, a woman working 3 jobs, there's no co-parent in the situation. She has the 14-year-old who does something inappropriate while babysitting for the 9-year-old sister. Well, if the mother knows that this is going to get, her 14-year-old labeled and put on a sex offender registry for life, this woman would be crazy for calling the police on her own son. What she needs is family therapy and a social support network, for her to be able to provide the kind of supervision a parent needs to be able to provide a child. So by making these one-size-fits-all laws, we're actually inhibiting people from coming forth.
Let's take that exact situation right there. Say that mother doesn't call the cops but goes to a therapist and tells them about the situation. What would happen in Canada, and then again with the same situation in the United States? Is it different?
Unfortunately, this one is not different. Both will make exactly the same wrong decision. Throughout the U.S., Canada not so much, but on this one, Canada has made the same mistake, has put into place a series of mandatory reporting legislations. They've essentially erased doctor-patient confidentiality. In a case like this, if a woman comes in, Doc, I have a problem. One of my kids is doing this to my other one of the kids. We, licensed psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health providers in general, are required to report this to the Children's Aid Society, who then, immediately yank control of the situation, often take from their point of view, perpetrator out of the situation and go from there. Well, so the result of that is nobody's going to come into therapy in the first place. An even more dramatic situation is a guy himself knows he feels tempted, or he's downloading child porn and doesn't seem to be able to stop. We want such a person to come in and say, Doc, I have a problem.
Help. Yeah.
Exactly. But if he knows that, the doc is required by law to call the Children's Aid Society or whatever, the local jurisdiction is, he's not going to do it. So instead of having pedophiles out in society receiving help, sex drive reducing medications, therapy, whatever it is, we have pedophiles out in society completely unbeknownst to anybody. It is insane what we've done.
And it's the same in Canada and the United States right now?
The mandatory reporting situation is basically the same.
Is there an area where Canada and the United States would differ? Where a situation in Canada might be okay for somebody to step forward and say something?
For that kind of reporting, no. That one has been lost in both, and there's only just now starting to be some discussion about whether that's a good idea, or is it backfiring. The biggest difference between the U.S. and the American systems are the SVP situations that the U.S. has created for itself. SVP stands for, it has a couple nicknames, sexually violent predator, I think was the original intent, or sexually violent person is a bit more neutral. These are people who have committed one or more sexual crimes in the U.S. After they've served their sentence, they are then pulled back out of society for what's essentially preventive detention. We think this person is at, pick whatever number, percentage, estimated risk. We don't want to pose that kind of risk, so the person is pulled out of society until they are cured, is the law. The way that they worked this in the U.S. was really kind of dodgy. In the U.S., they wanted to do this via the mental health laws, where if a person is a danger to themselves or to somebody else, then that person can be pulled off the street, brought into a hospital where we can treat the psychotic disorder or whatever it is that's ailing the person. They've kind of said, well, If pedophilia counts technically as a mental illness, yet let's use that system to pull these people off the street, even though we kind of know there is no way to turn a pedophile into a non-pedophile, so it gets them off the street permanently for a crime for which they've already served their sentence. Right, and we're now in a sticky kind of
it's so crazy. It's so there's so much involved to it, and it's again, it's one of those things. You just mentioned sexual violent predator, and in this conversation, it just made me start thinking about How to Catch a Predator.
No accident.
Sorry?
That's no accident. That's how you fulminate the masses, and that's how you get the crazies out calling and getting even more extremists elected into office.
Yeah, and so
doing what makes things worse. It just kind of sounds good in a soundbite.
Yeah, I was going to say, what are your thoughts on that program? Like,
what is it? Can you just
How to Catch a Predator was a, I don't know, 60 Minutes or something. Like, it was like a news journalism show where they would set up
a gotcha situation.
Yeah, it was like
they would have a cop flirting with somebody who poses, as a young boy or girl, flirting with whoever the potential predator is, luring them in. Oh, I have condoms. Meet me at whatever. Oh, my parents are out that night. Come in the back door.
Through like online chat.
Exactly. So they never met in person.
And then they would storm in with a camera crew and arrest them on the spot. And I never thought about it until right now, sitting here having this conversation. I went, because I watched a lot of How to Catch a Predator. And I was watching that going like, yeah, get those fuckers, And now in my head I'm going, whoa. That was I totally got caught up in that. I totally got caught up in the
sensationalism.
Sensationalization.
Because what if and exactly, I'm feeling the exact same way.
And now
I'm
I feel like shit going, oh God, why did I watch that? Like,
because
that's gross.
Because you might have someone who's actively going, oh, like I feel like this, but I do not want to act on it because I know that it's socially wrong and I don't want to act on it. And then you're getting somebody that's provoking you, and because of the systems we put in place where they're going to be reported to the police anyway, they're being like,
it's a step on the slippery slope.
It's
like
very interesting.
These people are not the same as, I'll call them the virtuous pedophiles. There was actually a support group called the Virtuous Pedophiles, which remind me, I'll mention them again. For the people who went and approached this alleged kid, well, they did something. This was not just being aware of their sexual interests and doing nothing and suppressing it. This is somebody who saw what they wanted to say. There was no victim. The victim didn't even exist.
Right.
But this is a person who did more than nothing. They had at least intent.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And let me just clarify. I don't mean that I feel bad for. I'm feeling weird about watching that show and feeling the way I felt about watching that show because I feel like it perpetuated stigma and judgment surrounding, like we were saying earlier, the difference between a pedophile and a child molester. To me, when I was watching that show, there's no fucking difference.
And they make it very black and white in that show, where the reality is we're obviously figuring out right now in this conversation is like not black and white at all. There's a massive gray area.
Super gray.
So James, a 16-year-old comes to you and says, "I'm feeling this desire towards young children. Can you help me? How do you...
Or where can they go? What can they do?
Excellent
If there's
question.
someone out there, what can they do?
For somebody who's realizing that they're sexually interested in kids, that's tough until 18, for two reasons. One is when they're young, they're closer to the ages of the people they're attracted to. They have a very different kind of access. Also, it's not so sure what their future interests are going to be. They do sometimes
it could evolve.
Grow older as we grow older,
Sure.
which is typical in most people. There is an organization, the one I mentioned ago, Virtuous Pedophiles, that I love sending people to. These are people who are not offenders, who realize that they're interested in kids, know that they have no choice but to suppress it, and just support themselves, remind each other they're not crazy, there are other people in exactly the same situation, and they're a wonderful, wonderful support group for that. It's called Virtuous Pedophiles. Their website, I think, is VIRPED. I don't remember if it's .org or .com.
Could one get?
But you can't join that organization until you're 18 because there are some people there who are attracted to 16-year-olds.
Oh God, that's
Right, so they use a perfectly logical line
Totally
of
makes
18.
sense.
So even
Yeah.
though I reflexively sent as many people as possible to them, they logically need to keep that one. So a 16-year-old just dealing with this, that's somebody that I would deal with much more closely, directly in therapy.
So I'm wondering.
but hold on. What happens in that case? You have to. That 16-year-old comes to your office and they say, "Doc, I'm starting to feel this way about my 1-year-old niece." Don't you have to report?
That's where the reporting laws start becoming very state-specific and very province-specific in Canada.
Okay.
The law here in Ontario and several different layers of organization and administration have policies, and we have to follow all of them. Basically, the idea is that we need to protect somebody from foreseeable harm.
Right.
So if there's somebody who's committed offenses before and says, here's somebody that I find attractive, that's now a foreseeable harm. Being pedophilic in general, with no history of the person of doing anything inappropriate, just their being pedophilic does not necessarily mean that they're posing a risk to anybody. So that would not be reportable. Now, just the person coming in for help on their own, we have every reason to think that if it gets worse, they will come in for come in for help. So in a situation like that, it's perfectly reasonable not to have to report. Unfortunately, a lot of people, understandably, are not just following the law, they're trying to protect themselves from a lawsuit. If they report a case that they didn't have to, nothing happens to the physician, psychologist, whoever. If it's a case that they don't report and it turns out that they did have to, that they're liable for.
Right.
So a lot of people start reporting out of default just in case,
Right.
even if it's
Just to
not
cover their
required.
ass.
Exactly. So if somebody says they're attracted to kids in general, I have no particular person to protect. So my job, or the healthcare provider's job, is not to be the police and get somebody who's at risk. It's to protect an identifiable person. If it's a hypothetical person, or if it's a person whose name I don't know or location I don't know, I can't protect them. So that I would not report, or that one is not required.
How
to
many
report.
people are coming and saying and giving a specific person?
Those are rare. In a real-world situation, if somebody is coming in, they have the right to keep silent, not see me, withdraw consent. They have all of those rights, as they should. So when it becomes clear that this is the land we're going to be hiking around, it starts with the therapist being very, very specific about what's reportable, what's not, and under what conditions. So here, given these circumstances, now what do you want to tell me? What don't you want to tell me? Do we end the session right now? But these are the limits of confidentiality.
Right. I'm curious to know what the statistics are on the likelihood of someone to reoffend. Someone who has knowingly acted upon their urge to have sex with a child. If they do it once, is it almost guaranteed that they're going to do it again, or they will keep doing it, or it will escalate to go further and further? Statistically speaking,
to boil it down to a number, which I will then immediately take back, is 15%-ish, somewhere between 10 and 20% of cases that are, and this is where it now starts to become, it depends.
Right.
Of the cases that are reported, convicted, so of course we found out about them, the person serves time and is reintegrated into society one way or another. On average, somewhere between 10 to 15-ish% of those people will commit new offenses when you pull them all together.
And be tried, convicted, and...
Right. So it's a much harder question of the people who never get caught, are they going to do it again? Well, there's no way to know. They never got caught, so there was no way to track them. But the more victims they have, the more likely they are to be caught, unless they're in some kind of a large institution, not to mention any particular churches, which is actually actively helping these people to, or at least used to actively help these people from becoming discovered. So the numbers are a little bit hard to take at face value, even though we can just take a big average and come up with one number. The other problem is that the people who are at highest risk are also in jail longest. And so they're not released until they're older, and age is one of the primary things that decreases a person's risk of reoffending.
Oh, right.
The other,
just sex
Just
drive in
because
general.
sex drive lowers as you get older.
Exactly. It's just easier for them to control themselves.
Right.
Another one is in incest situations are also unlikely to commit new ones, not because of any particular rehabilitation, but because they're not in their families anymore. You know, the people that the pattern in which they are most likely to do it again no longer exists around them. So that also changes the number a bit. But all of that said, it's still true that it's a mistake to call these people predators. The great majority of them are not. One of the things that we have been able to do in science is to do a pretty good job at predicting what characteristics make a person more versus less likely to commit new offenses. And so even though the overall number of people is somewhere between 10 and 15, we can figure out which of these people are 2 and 3% versus the ones who are 40 and 50% likely.
Right.
It seems it's really fascinating because we're talking about in the whole scheme of things, like whenever there's this huge connotation of evil negativity around pedophilia, and in large part, it seems to me, by my logic, because of the fact that you hear, when you hear about a pedophile, it's because they were caught molesting a child. So all of the information that we get, or a vast majority of the information we get about someone who has a sexual preference for a child, is
that they're acting on
it. And because it seems like because of the social constructs that we have, we don't ever hear the other side of the story unless we are able to sit down at a table like this, talk to someone like you, and get that information and start to shift our perspective. Because just to hear you say that the vast majority of these people are not predators is like total brain shift, like that I never thought of.
Because you don't have pedophiles coming out and saying publicly, I'm a pedophile,
because they don't have
get
the ability
chastised by the public.
Right, if pedophile walked by the schoolyard, nothing happened. Film at 6. You just don't see that. We only we see the most heinous cases.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
So the work that you are doing currently? Are you guys putting in research and work into how to treat someone who is a pedophile, like how to manage that situation, or how are there tools that
such things exist, and there are labs who are doing that kind of work, but that's not what I'm doing.
Okay.
My own work is mostly on the biological end and the brain end.
Okay.
My thought process on that, and I was thinking about this question earlier, and then I just decided not to ask it, but since it got brought up, is that, I guess my question to you is, do you believe in that? Because if we're talking about this as a sexual preference, homosexuality is a sexual preference.
Right.
And think about, just the history of homosexuality and going, oh, well, we can change them. And church programs to try and convert someone who's gay to not be gay. It just is it just seems...
Right. Like, that's insane. Why would we ever do that?
Right, exactly. Right. And if they are both sexual preferences... That's what I mean.
But James, I guess if you're studying the brain and the development of the brain and how that might have an effect on sexual preference, is there a possibility to go in and tap into that and manipulate it in some way to take away those desires towards younger children?
Yes and no. The things that we found that make the brain of a pedophile different from the brain of a non-pedophile aren't the kinds of things that we know how to change. the best analogy I have is that after it's baked, I can't turn the chocolate cake into the vanilla cake. Early in the process, I can not add the chocolate, but after it's baked, that's that. So despite the new and really breathtaking breakthroughs that are being made today, stem cell research, different neurological, different aspects of the brain that we thought were much more stable than they actually are, those exist, but none of them has really been of the kind that really suggests any obvious treatment for an existing case.
So what is your work based on then? What are you trying to accomplish with your work?
Yeah, like, is there an end game or?
I'm old-fashioned. I just want to know what makes
Just
people
know, like,
into
why-
whatever it is they're
Yeah,
into.
what
I
makes
want
them
the
tick?
$64,000 question.
Yeah.
What makes a human brain interested in whatever they're interested in?
Mm-hmm.
When I first started in research, actually, I was planning on working what makes gay brains different from straight brains. And then other people, Simon LeVay is the most famous, started making great progress on that. But then I had this opportunity to do brain research on another very atypical population. So that's where I've ended up. But really, my question is, how do these all go together? How does the brain know what to look for? How does it even know what a human looks like in order to know, go for that?
Yeah.
Never mind the subtle variations in age that makes it go for that and not that.
Yeah. So I am kind of curious about this. Like, are there pedophiles out there who are like, yeah, I don't want to be this. So what can we do to like end it? Are there
absolutely.
like chemical castration, or like what's the like are there processes of?
Well, that's a slightly different question. There are pedophiles who have discussions talking about if there were a pill I could take to be not pedophilic. A lot of them would say yes. I mean, it's just they would rather be able to blend in and be a regular person. That really is their preference for a lot of them. For other people, they say it's just because they've grown up with it, it's just a part of them, and they can't imagine being somebody else, which is what that would cause. Some think that. But that's different from giving somebody a sex drive reducing medication. That we can do. Essentially, they're the same testosterone blockers that we would use if somebody, for example, has a testosterone-sensitive prostate cancer, that prostate cancer cells spread in the presence of testosterone. So part of the treatment is cutting off the testosterone, chemical castration.
Right.
So a lot of these people decide they would rather have no sex drive than a sex drive they can't express and is always distracting them.
Right. And so are there? Is that an option for like pedophiles?
It can be,
Right.
if you can tell your doctor to begin with. You can't go in and say, "Doctor, I think I have prostate cancer. Would you give me Lupron?"
Right.
They'd have to say, "Doc, and it's an extremely powerful anti-hormone chemical. The doc really has to know why.
Why? What's
Right.
the process of that? Like, how extreme is what did you call it?
Lupron.
Lupron. Like, if someone was to start taking Lupron today.
Chemically, it's extremely powerful. It really does very, very effectively reduce the ability of testosterone in the blood to do what it's supposed to do. But human male sex drive is not purely testosterone fueled. There are other things that contribute to it, and those stay. So most of the people who do take it talk about it being, much easier. They feel much more relaxed. They often feel less aggressive, but they still find the people that they find attractive still to be attractive. Usually they'll describe it as taking the edge off of any impulses. So it doesn't get rid of it, but it makes it easier for them to manage.
Does it present itself in any other physiological ways? Like, does it? I mean,
Do you mean there's the medication?
Yeah, like, are there any other really harsh side effects of taking
The worst of them for long-term use, it reduces bone density.
Oh, okay.
Which is the same same problem that a regular medical patient needs if they're on Lupron for long periods of time.
Or astronauts.
Yeah. We spoke to Chris Hadfield, and he was talking about how his bones he pisses out his bones once he gets up to space.
I doubt that it would be the same reason. His testosterone levels should be normal.
Yeah, right.
I think gravity might be related to this one, but this isn't my area of expertise.
Probably, yeah.
I can't help but just emphasize how fascinated I am by this conversation and the problems that we have socially in terms of approaching this subject with like clear vision. And like you said, yeah, sure, that'd be a viable solution if you could just go to your doctor and say, hey, I'm having this is how I feel, and I know that this is a potential medication for me. Can I have it? But then there's the whole social issue of reporting and like outing somebody and the stigma, and like it just.
There's a lot of very simple, inexpensive stuff we can do and don't for no good reason. For example, imagine anonymous therapy over the internet.
Yeah.
Well, of course, but that would take care of all kinds of problems. It's easier to stay anonymous, but no, I'm sorry, licensure laws in one state. Because it counts as doing therapy in the state where the patient is. So if I try doing that with somebody in, pick a place, Nebraska, well, that's me practicing psychology without a license in Nebraska.
Right.
So we can't do it, especially with these kinds of cases that can get very highly scrutinized. But what an awful reason to leave these people with no therapist. I mean, there are not very many people who can do that kind of therapy. And even though we have this obvious technology that we can use to put these people, to reduce their risk, in touch with trained people, and we're not doing it because state licensure laws, that's a decent reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It seems like there's a lot of shortfalls in the, or shortcomings in like how we approach it, like law-wise in the justice system.
And people aren't thinking about prevention. People are thinking about punishment.
Right. Yeah.
People are thinking about revenge. And people are thinking about punitive measures, but actually solving the problem before there's a problem. Well, now it looks like you're advocating for pedophiles. My own name, it has to take the hits it does for being associated. But most people want to reflexively side with the victim, which is great. Mm-hmm. But if you think one step beyond that, you could prevent this victim from existing in the first place, or this person existing as a victim.
How much shit have you taken?
I was going to say, how much flack do you get for the work you do?
It's kind of funny. It's when you're a sex researcher, it doesn't matter what you say. There is some group on the extreme left or the extreme right. Just having an answer that is taken seriously, somebody is profiting by some other answer supported by whatever their political or religious system is. So no matter what topic I address, somebody someplace is pissed.
But it's crazy because if you were like prophylactically trying to treat cancer, nobody would be like, "Oh, you
prophylactically."
I knew somebody was going to say that.
Yeah,
you said that earlier in another thing.
You mean proactively?
Proactively.
You know what a prophylactic
prophylactic is when
prophylactics are proactive.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is that actually the word?
It's a medication or treatment before you need to be treated.
It's a preventative.
Yeah. You guys are idiots. So anyway.
Fuck, I'm the dumb one in this scenario.
It's just that it's almost always, or for a while, it's really almost. It's been used as a synonym for condom.
Exactly. And the only reason I'm using it in this statement is for sake of making a point. But if you were doing it for cancer,
I thought you were going to say a pun.
Nobody would say that you're advocating on behalf of cancer or something like that. You're trying to...
Once people understand that this is actually about prevention, they line up, salute, and say, where can I write a check?
Right.
Yeah.
The hard part is getting them to just take a deep breath, give me 30 seconds, and you'll get this.
Yeah.
Right. So it's probably like the people who will look at the title of this episode and be like, oh, what the fuck are those guys going to be talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
But if they actually listen and get to this point right now, an hour into it, then maybe
you
they'll
will
start
have
to...
them if you just get a person to hear that pedophilia is separate from child molestation.
All right, that's what I said right at the beginning. There's going to be people that hear that and they're going to go, fuck no.
Well, I'm glad that we got that.
Most people are fine with it, and exactly like you did. Oh, I never thought of that. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The people who have trouble with that are the ones with the largest emotional investments.
Yeah.
Sometimes those are unhealthy emotional investments. They just want to show off how bad they can be to whom they perceive to be the bad guy. Virtue signaling. That's a chunk of it, and you can't do anything about it, really. And then there's another group of, and again, I have to be very careful when I talk about them. I'll refer to them as radical victim groups. Now, these are not, it sounds like victim blaming, and I want to make very, very sure that that's not what I'm doing. There are people who indeed have been victimized and have to go through all of the stages and all of the healing. Sometimes it ends at forgiveness, sometimes it doesn't, fine. But there are some people who get stuck and victimhood becomes their identity.
Right.
That somehow gives them special knowledge, that therefore they know what's best because this happened to them. Now, I understand where they're coming from, and it makes perfect sense. For all I know, I would have the same thought if I went through what they did. But the emotionality often makes it much harder to take a deep breath and think about this for a second. I understand why you want this person in jail for life, but is that really the kind of society? Is that really effective? Is that the money it would take to do that? Are we better off putting that money into prevention programs? And these are complicated issues for somebody who can be objective about it.
Right.
For somebody who's been through the victim part of it, as I say, I can't imagine being through that end. But there are some groups there for where the emotionality and the irrationality that follows from it, as I say, becomes an identity, and there's no reasoning with it. It's all about punishment and working out their emotionality rather than genuine prevention.
There's no way for them to look at the situation from a top-down perspective.
Usually it takes more time. Some of these people get involved with with groups that call themselves therapy groups, but really they're just echo chambers that are... it's very natural for... there are many victims who feel like they asked for it or deserved it, or they themselves did something wrong. And so a part of very healthy and good therapy is realizing that, no, this was the perpetrator who did something wrong. But when done with people who are not trained in doing that, it's easy to imagine how a group therapy session just becomes blame the other, blame the other, blame the other, and that becomes the person's response to all of these discussions is blaming external people rather than, understanding the relative complexity of the situation. That takes time, and not everybody is at that point, and they most certainly are a stakeholder in the conversation, but the emotionality sometimes the emotionality doesn't help. There are many situations in which it actually can make recidivism more instead of less likely.
Right, massive obstacles that prevent them from being objective and looking down from a top-down perspective and seeing this from a zoomed out view.
Exactly.
All of this entire episode, it's just very complicated.
Oh my God.
It's all very, very complicated. But
at the same time, I feel way more clear.
Way more clear. Yeah, I totally agree.
If you had to summarize this up in like one or two sentences and deliver a message to the people out there who don't quite grasp this concept, what would you say to them?
The two bottom line factoids. The one, of course, that we started with, that child molestation is not the same as pedophilia itself. And the other is that all the evidence is that people appear to be born either pedophilic or not pedophilic, just as much as people seem to be born gay or straight or into whatever they are. They're born with it. And, humans judging other humans, on the basis of, something they didn't choose that they were born with has not been an overall plus.
No.
All we can do with these people is acknowledge the situation that they are, and now let's take it to its logical conclusion, keeping everybody as safe as possible. Where I would love to see society generalize over the next generation is we've gone from, gay rights, gay and lesbian rights, and now GLB, now we have the T. Now, of course, I'm skipping ahead. It's by sheer coincidence I've run to the most frickin' possibly stigmatized sexual minority possible. If we can be effective with this group, everybody else falls into place. Shoe fetish, piece of cake. Cross-dressers, that's nothing. If we can bring the stigma associated with this to some reasonable, logical level, then all the sexual diversities fall into place.
That's really fucking powerful.
It is. This was fantastic.
My
this
pleasure.
honestly was fantastic. It was really nice to have you in here, and I hope the people who are listening can really chew on this and take something from it.
Yeah, I can't really even express how much this conversation means. It's just It's just so fucking important.
Yeah.
I'm delighted. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's rare to have an opportunity to be able to have an in-depth conversation about something like this. But as you can see, it's not the kind of thing that gives itself well to sound bites.
No.
You need time between ideas. You need to
Yeah.
mull it over for a second. It's
Yeah.
just, with just some very simple, basic, very easily provable facts.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, tick, 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 tick.
Right.
Oh. And it just falls into
Right.
place.
You
It
can't
makes
just
so
say-
much sense. And
You can't just say it's okay to empathize with
Yeah,
pedophiles.
no,
That's
totally.
like, that, as a soundbite. That just doesn't.
But it's easy to
Believable.
empathize with somebody saddled with a sexual orientation they didn't ask for and didn't do anything with.
Absolutely.
Right, totally. Right,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
It's. I feel vastly more educated as a human as a result of this. So
Totally.
I thank you for that.
My pleasure. Happy to help.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. This is it for today. We're going to be back next week with another fascinating, fun conversation. Make sure you go over to iTunes. Please rate, subscribe, review.
And join the conversation on this one because
Let us know
you
what
can
you
see-
think. Like, hit us up on Facebook. Hit us
Yeah.
up on Twitter. Go to our website. Send us an email. We would love to know what your thoughts are. That's it for today.
I'm Brian.
I'm Taylor.
And I'm Jeremy, and this is Sickboy.